So the question is, how do you achieve a consistent, clear metal guitar tone across an entire project when you're dealing with different, maybe amp heads, pickups, cabs, or even different guitar tunings? And also, how do you widen a guitar sound when maybe you're dealing with a live recording where there's just a single guitar track? Welcome to Viewer Questions Answered, episode 13. Okay, now I know I normally upload these videos on a Monday, but last week was quite the week. Now, if you watched my videos last week, you probably know that I had a new carpet installed in my studio, which meant I had to take everything out of my room, bring everything back in, and rewire my entire studio from scratch. Now, this isn't really that bad. I figured it would take maybe half the week, but in the process of doing this, I found out I had an issue with my electrical, which thankfully is almost all sorted out, but unfortunately it kind of jacked up my upload schedule for this week, but that's life. Now, last week when I uploaded the video where I showed you how I had to break everything apart and have the new carpet installed, I've had many people ask about my patch bay and my routing. So next week I'll be uploading a new studio rundown where I break down my routing and explain to you how I stay nice and efficient in my studio, and I'll be explaining in detail how I utilize my patch bay for a nice, efficient workflow. Okay, and our first question here comes from Manuel. Hey Bobby, I hope you're doing well. Maybe a question for your next Q&A. I'm playing around with some high gain easy mix guitar presets, and some of them sound really good when I jam around with the guitar only, but if I take these presets into a mix, they sound horrible. Can you explain why? Greetings from Austria. Okay, well Manuel, I'm gonna be honest with you. As much as I love Toontrack's products, I cannot live without EZdrummer. I use it all of the time for songwriting and often in the final production as well. Their Easy Mix software I found is great for demos. Now, to be honest, I really only have experience with the Easy Mix guitar software, and it is great for maybe background elements, leads, but I really can't use it for rhythm guitar tone, which honestly is the most important element as far as any of your guitar tracks are concerned in a final production. And the main reason why is because it doesn't allow you to import your own custom impulse response. Now, I'm sure you know by now if you've watched any of my videos on this channel just how important impulse responses are when it comes to the final guitar tone within a production. And unfortunately, most impulse responses out there just aren't that great. I don't know why, but in my opinion, that just seems to be the case. So with that being said, you can download mine for absolutely free. It's an IR of my favorite Mesa Boogie cab out of my studio. There's a link below in this video's description. And unfortunately, as far as I know, unless they've updated something, you cannot import impulse responses into Easy Mix software. Again, I'm not knocking the software. I love Toontrack. It's really good for demos, or like I said, maybe background elements, guitar leads, things like that, but I haven't had much luck with it as far as dialing in a decent rhythm guitar tone. And when it comes to rhythm guitar tone, you really can't mess around. You really need to be using great IR with tight playing and/or editing. So Manuel, I hope that was helpful. Unfortunately, there is no easy fix, but the good news is that you could download an excellent free amp sim like the Amped Roots plugin by ML Sound Lab and use my custom IR, and you'll automatically have a great guitar tone at the source. Okay, our next question here comes from Brandon. Hi Bobby, I was wondering, in a scenario where you have an EP or an album with multiple tunings recorded on different guitars and all using different pickups, how do you go about making the production have the same consistency or tones throughout the whole project? Okay, well Brandon, I have great news for you. Even if you're using different tunings or different guitars or different pickups, they're really not gonna sound that drastically different if you're using the same cab and/or impulse response. Now, most guitar players really get into pickup selection and wood selection, and yes, as a guitar player, I know that stuff does make a difference, but not as much of a difference as you might think, at least within the context of a full production. As a matter of fact, I would go as far as to say, and I know a lot of other producers agree, that your speaker cab makes more of a difference than the actual head that you're using. In other words, if you're using a Mesa Boogie or Marshall or PV5150, all going through the same cab, there's less of a difference when switching between these heads than you'd think. And there's even less of a difference between pickups, guitars, and even tunings. So if you want to keep a nice consistent tone across your entire production, my advice to you would be to use the same impulse response or cab throughout the entire production. It's something that I do all of the time, especially when I'm working with a band where, maybe the two guitar players play differently and one might need a little more gain, the other one might need a little less gain. One guy wants to use an orange, the other guy wants to use maybe a Randall or something like that. I'll plug them both through the same cab and/or impulse response, and all of a sudden the tone will be much more consistent. So dude, I really wouldn't overthink this too much. Just remember, it's all about the speaker cap as far as consistency is concerned when it comes to metal or heavy guitar tone. Excellent question, and I hope that helps. Okay, and our next question here comes from Fleming Martins. What is a good choice of studio monitors for metal production? I saw in your videos that you have something looking like Kali. Is that correct? I use a pair of very old first generation KRK Rocket 5s, and I feel that they're quite good for mixing electronic music, but for metal, I think I want to go with something else. What are your views on this? And which studio monitors would you recommend? Thank you so much for your fantastic videos. Cheers from Denmark, Fleming Martins. P.S. If I want to submit a mix for your CSM series of vids, would it be okay to send it to this address also? So Fleming, thank you so much for your questions. And let me just say this, if you'd like to submit a mix for my Mix Critique video series, you can do it by responding to any of the emails that I send you as a member of my email list. It doesn't matter which one. Okay, another hot topic here, studio monitor selection. Let me just tell you this, I have the most basic, minimalistic, and simple outlook when it comes to studio monitors. And here's my opinion. It doesn't matter what monitors you use, as long as you know them very well. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I do not own Kali monitors. Maybe they look like Kali monitors in one of my videos. Out of the studio, I had an old pair of Samson Revolves? I don't know, something like that. I've had them since 2005, a very long time. And they're just cheapo 5-inch monitors. They're actually the first monitors I've ever owned, but the key was that I knew them inside and out because I used them for so long. Now, just recently, I replaced them at the studio because I was having an issue with grounding within one of them with a pair of Mackie MR628s, 626s. For me, the monitors I have at the studio don't really matter too much because I mainly mix at home, and that's my next point here. If you saw my at-home mix setup, you probably wouldn't believe it. I use a pair of IK Multimedia iLoud desktop speakers or studio monitors. Super small monitors, and that's because I found throughout the years, through my own experience, that I prefer smaller speakers because they're much more revealing in the mid-range. And in my experience, the better your mid-range is and the more consistent and warm your mid-range is, the better your overall mix will be. Now, most people that see this setup will ask, well, how do you deal with low end? And for me, it's very simple. I just check my low end with a pair of closed back headphones. That's it. And to drive this point home even further, so many pro mix engineers use Yamaha NS10 studio monitors. And if you've ever heard them, they're terrible, terrible sounding speakers, but that's not what it's about. Engineers like them because the mid-range is very revealing on them. And also, when guys use them, they're using them for decades upon decades, so they know them very well. And that's what I want you to remember. It doesn't really matter what you use, as long as you know your speakers very well and you know what music should sound like on your monitors. Another tip here that you could apply to your workflow is to listen quietly if you're in an untreated room. A lot of times people listen just way too loud, and then comb filtering and other issues are introduced into what you're hearing because of the sound that's bouncing around in your room. So just know your monitors, listen to a lot of your favorite records on your setup, listen quietly so you're hearing more of the direct sound from your monitors, and maybe check your low end with headphones. I know this isn't a direct answer, and I don't really have a specific pair that I can recommend to you, because in my opinion, it really comes down to just knowing your monitors, regardless of what brand, make, or model they are. Most monitors that are out there these days are pretty damn good, even the dirt cheap ones. So Fleming, excellent question, and thanks for your submission. Okay, our next question here comes from Andre. Hi Bobby, when I'm aiming for an analog vibe in my mixes, most of the time I go for a saturation/distortion plugin. Sometimes I may use a colorful compressor, but I've already ruined my mixes because of this. I never know which one I should use, and sometimes I don't even know how or where to use them. Any tips on this subject? Okay, Andre, excellent question, and let me just say this. This is something that I personally struggle with a ton when I first got into analog emulation earlier in my mixing or recording career. And here's what I've come to realize through years and years of experience. Just don't overcomplicate it and don't overthink it. These days, if I want a little bit of analog warmth within my mixes, sometimes I might use a tape saturator plugin. Sometimes I might just use a distortion plugin, right, that's stock within my DAW. Sometimes I'll use a plugin by maybe a company called Sonimus, where they'll have saturation built right into their, compressor plugins and EQ plugins. Sometimes I might actually use console emulation across each channel, sometimes on the master bus. It doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, these are all just tools. And the way I like to work is I use a handful of these tools. I get to know them very well because they all have their own unique, tonal characteristics. This way, I know which ones I want to use depending on my mood or the sound of the source tracks themselves. For an example, the saturator within Pro Tools is very, very heavy-handed and really darkens up bright sounds very well. Now, I only know this because I use it a whole lot, and I don't go crazy trying, 100 different saturator plugins. Now, if I want more of a mid-range saturation that has a little more going on in the upper mids and the upper harmonics, I might use the Sonoma saturation. Again, I know this because I limit my tools and I get to know my tools very well. But when I'm mixing, I don't overthink it. I just choose the tools that I feel will suit the material best in that moment. And guess what? If I mix the song a month later, I might choose different tools. The idea is to not overthink it, get to know your saturator plugins very well, and just mix and have a good time. There is no right or wrong way. It all comes down to personal preference and what you're feeling in the moment. So Andre, excellent question, and I hope that helps on your journey, because that was something that I struggled with for a very long time. Okay, and our final question here comes from Jerry. I have a band that I used to play bass in. Our drummer died. Jerry, I'm really sorry to hear that. I recorded all of our practices, everything mic'd up, just like you would to record. I only have one guitar track. I want to make that guitar sound wider. How would I do that with just one guitar track? How would I use the delay in Reaper to get that doubled guitar sound? Thanks, Bobby, I've learned so much from you. Okay, well, Jerry, this is something that I do all of the time when I'm mixing live recordings, when I'm dealing with just one guitar player. Luckily, it's such a simple process. Now, there are two ways that you can go about it. Here's way number one. Let's say you have that mono guitar track and you want to make it wider. Simply duplicate the track so then you have two guitar tracks and delay one of these tracks by, let's say, 20 milliseconds. A 20 millisecond delay, or maybe even a 15 millisecond or 25 millisecond delay, if your tracks are panned, will automatically create a hole in the middle, which will almost give you the effect of a doubled rhythm guitar track. The only thing that you're gonna wanna remember is that when the leads kick in, you might wanna go back to a mono guitar track, but that depends on how in depth you wanna get with the mix itself. So that's one way of doing it. And just to recap, again, you have a mono guitar track, pan it, let's say left, duplicate the track, pan it right, and delay one of the sides by 20 milliseconds. You'll have a magical hole in the middle of the stereo spectrum that'll give you the effect of a nice wide guitar sound. And the other way you could do it was with a simple mono to stereo delay plugin on a mono guitar track. You have your mono track, you stick the mono to delay plugin on that mono track, and you delay the one side again by 20 milliseconds. It's pretty much doing the exact same thing that I mentioned previously, just without having to duplicate your track with the audio that already exists on the track itself. Now, every DAW does this in a slightly different way. I remember doing this with Reaper, and I think I had to do some routing within the plugin itself, if I'm remembering correctly. But at the end of the day, it's the same concept. You just want to duplicate the track and delay one side by 20, maybe 15, maybe 25 milliseconds. Experiment with what sounds best to you with the source material, and you'll have a nice wide guitar sound based off of a mono source. So Jerry, I hope that helps, and keep me posted on your progress. So I would just like to shout out and thank all of my email subscribers for submitting this excellent group of questions. These this week I felt were really, really good, maybe because personally I've dealt with all of these issues myself. And also remember, if you've submitted a question and haven't gotten to it yet, just be patient. I will definitely get to it within one of the upcoming videos within this series. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon in order to be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. If you're interested in some Frightbox swag, there's a link to the Frightbox merch store below in this video's description. And again, you can download my free guitar cab impulse response. There's a link below in this video's description. Simply download it and load it into your favorite amp synth plugin. Get right to dialing in killer metal guitar tone with absolute ease. Until next time, happy mixing.